Welcome to the show, everybody. I just want to begin by saying thank you for being here. It's been a trying time for me, and just knowing that I was going to do this show gave me, I don't know if you want to call it an excuse, whatever you want to call it. It gave me the reason to actually study my games, and that is the hardest thing for me to get around to doing. I know that it's also the hardest thing for other people. And to that point, I'm going to do a YouTube video probably tomorrow about how to analyze your games. And it's actually more difficult of a subject than I think people, or at least I originally thought it would be, just because it is so hard. And so me doing this show, a big part of it is just forcing myself to have the centerpiece of my training be going over my games and then forcing myself to talk about it here on the show. Okay, we're going to start with this position, but before I do, I want to say I started this game episode 7. That was several weeks ago. That was really before the whole COVID thing had started, and we had a very interesting analysis. Josh Riddell was in the chat. We were just talking and stuff. And I'm going to start actually for this position. The thing I want to say is, if you want to hear me whine about my life and what the COVID thing has done to it, then definitely all you need to do is go look at episodes 8 and 9. So I don't want to dwell on any of it. The only thing I want to stress is the tournament situation. It really is a bummer, and I don't have a clear sense for the first time in my life of like what exactly it is I'm training for and what it's going to look like. And that's kind of a big deal, but what I'm basically just, let's say, assuming is that eventually I'm going to be playing classical chess again. Okay, so in this position, we had an interesting discussion in episode 7, and that was all, without the computer or anything. And now, since then, I've done the whole game first on the board, and then I've kind of looked at what the machine said too. The machine is a great way to really just check yourself in terms of the assumptions you're making. Though there's a lot of things that we're talking about, especially in this position, where the human understanding is fairly indispensable. So let me begin by saying that this position I played fairly quickly. Now, there was pressure to play quickly. It was a game 100 thing with 30-second increment. I'll talk more about the 30-second increment later. It was the first time I really had the experience of what that means, of 30-second increment. But I needed to play quickly, and I made my next move basically instantly. White is obviously just taken on c5. And one of the things I want to chastise myself for is a great rule that I tell my students, and I need to be more diligent in applying myself, is that whenever there's a pawn structure shift, that will be the time to reevaluate what's going on. And the metaphor I like is that when the pawn structure shifts, that's really when the roles of the pieces will change. Pawns aren't actually people, but the people are standing in relationship to the pawns, and so they need to think about what's going on in their life. Do I look like that guy? With me are IM's David Prus and Kostya Kavutsky, and this is ChessDojo. On Discord, we have a whole community of people trying to improve their chess. On Twitch, we're doing regular events, and what I'm asking you to do right now is to subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. We felt like that White had achieved something like a fortress, even though it looks promising for Black. And that's an interesting psychological thing, because when you look at it, like, there's no reason for Black to complain here. So we actually had a debate. We both assumed in that broadcast that my move BC, which I played definitely too fast, but that it was the wrong decision. And we had a friendly debate about whether black should play knight f3, bishop f3, bc. That's what Josh liked. And in this position, you can say, like, at least black can hope to outplay white by all means, because there's simple maneuvers like that, or bishop d4. And the rook's obviously going to come to b8. So there's that one. Or I wanted to play more actively with dc, and claim that, this d file is very spicy. And this is a far more active approach. And in hindsight, I really don't like this one, mostly because it gives black this counterplay and this diagonal. Now, I don't think white should take because of this, and then it feels nice for black. In addition to just sitting on the position with one of these moves, there's this incredibly spicy move, and then I don't think we have absolutely nothing at all. Okay, so my move was definitely wrong, but interestingly, the computer said, look, no, this is the way to go, and you shouldn't even be afraid of this position. Now, afraid's the wrong word, right? But you shouldn't be opposed to this position. So let's talk a little bit about the dynamics here. Clearly, white has an absolutely terrible bishop. This knight isn't doing anything. The bishop here is locked out, and the queen is going to have to move at some point. So the drama, though, for black is, what exactly is it that I'm going to do? Right. I'm sorry about that complex. All right. So white played probably not the best move, but a move that's very important to understand. It will explain the whole psychological setup of the game. He plays bishop f1, which basically says, you can't do anything to me, and I'm just going to sit on the position. And here's the first move I want to criticize that I played. One thing in my training regimen has been to cut off playing blitz. And, I've got at this point something like 30 minutes left, so it's getting a little blitzy. Again, this 30-second increment changes everything. It's getting a little blitzy, and this next move feels like just a move which is making a superficial threat. I play knight f4. The knight, it's a beautiful knight, but it's not doing anything on f4. Obviously, it's attacking the pawn, but what I mean is we don't really want to take that pawn anyway. It would liberate the bishop on f1, even if we could take the pawn. And that brings us to this whole interesting thought experiment that I needed to do right now, which is, where does the knight really belong? And the deeper answer really is, it belongs on c6. And I did not appreciate that in the game. Later. Later I do. Okay, so this is my first superficial move, and it doesn't really ruin anything. White continues this passive ways. Rook d7 doesn't ruin anything, just like knight f4 doesn't ruin anything, but it's already a little misguided. I should say to myself, I got to put the rook on the b file, and this game I'm playing with the d pawn isn't going to work out. All right, rook b1, rook cd8, and another move that is not accurate, but it reflects white's temperament or plan in this game, which is just to sit like a rock. And that's why I called this episode Cracking the Shell. All right, it was at this moment that the Twitch gods decided they didn't like me and everything crashed. So I'm here just going to jump in. It's an entirely different time of day. The rain is pitter-pattering, and I'm just going to bridge the gap in terms of what happened. So I played queen a7. My opponent played f3, and I then had to react because I was worried that my knight would get hit with g3. So we then got this position, and that's where we're going to rejoin the action. The interesting issue here for trying to understand this position, I think, is you can say black looks better, but what is the plan? I don't really have any pawn breaks anymore. The pawn breaks are all gone. And in general, it often happens when you have doubled pawns that it just becomes a lot harder to do pawn breaks because they're less flexible. Yes, I have better pieces, and yes, these two pieces are terrible. And the value of this guy has skyrocketed. So if I could somehow exchange that thing, that would at least be a plan. But the thing that I find so interesting about this position, I know that I would have the same problem if I was black here, is that it doesn't feel good to sit because white's already done all of the normal sitting moves. If you were just going to sit, right? So the funny thing is white makes a mistake in precisely this position. Which I find interesting because it's precisely the position where he has no more moves really to make. And that's this move, a4. Now, interestingly, my sense of this position is that if white just sat, I didn't really see a way forward. Of course, I'm going to play forever. I feel like maybe I'm going to do something like queen c7, a5, for example. But, I'm not doing all that much when I do that. But the computer, is just like, no, you're better. And I think it might be true. And what I didn't appreciate is, again, that what needs to happen is the knight coming here is a big deal. And the fact of this knight c6 plan makes my opponent's next move all the more critical of a mistake. But the thing I want to stress about my opponent's move here, a4, is that when you're sitting, it's very hard to just sit, especially after you've done all of your sitting moves like white has here. So the interesting thing here for white and for all of us really is this thing that Magnus Carlsen said. And a lot of times when the kid talks, it goes over my head. But this thing I ended up pondering a lot, and it made a lot of sense. And I think it applies to this position. When someone asked him the dumb question, what makes him better than other players? And he said that he knew when to attack and when to defend. And it's a very interesting observation in that there's a sensibility of like, when do I just pull everything back and when do I go forward? And this move, a4, is definitely an example of a position where you don't want to go forward. Mainly because you've already committed yourself to an all-in defensive shell. And what a4 is going to do is it's going to create a target. It's going to make it easier for me to go after the a pawn. And it also, of course, gives up this square and really commits the pawn to eventually being on a5. Now, of course, when he played a4, I assumed, right, he wants to play a5 so that he can harass me on the b6 square. So, hi Dor, how you doing? So rook b8, I had to do, but the interesting thing is, maybe it's what I want to do anyway. The guy takes and plays a5. And the funny thing about this position all of a sudden is I think it's now gone from a little bit unpleasant, but probably holdable, to something close to lost. I would never call it completely lost, but it's now problematic because, this piece is so bad, the knight isn't doing much, and all I have to do is come at this pawn, really. Okay, now, in the game, I played what I think was a mistake and played queen b4. It's one of these moves the computer, again, is like, no, it wasn't that bad. In fact, it was fine. But I didn't see everything. We're already getting, it's getting a little intense with the time. I'm down to 18 minutes when I play queen b4. And again, it's a move that I played pretty quickly. The simple move to play is rook b7. But here's the thing about rook b7. in order to play rook b7, you have to understand that the endings with the rooks off are all very, very bad. And even in the postmortem, when I say postmortem, I just mean me sitting alone with the board. I didn't really appreciate it at first. For example, I was looking first at positions like this and trying to do all kinds of fancy stuff. But the weird thing is like opening up this diagonal is not only counterplay for white, but someday he might even do some kind of d4, c5 and take my pawn on a6, or at least put pressure on my pawn. So what I didn't understand was that this ending is absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible for white, excuse me, because the knight does its thing all the way back. It seems one of the reasons it doesn't feel like it should work is it takes forever. And even with all those moves I just made, part of it even has to be me putting the king on d6 first. So it's like loads of moves that black has to make. But the terrible situation for white is that there's not really anything he can do about it. Yeah, really a bummer. So I didn't appreciate that. It took me the longest time. And after I appreciated that, it became clear to me, right, that a4 was a tremendous mistake, and I did not sense that during the game. But I think the thing about Magnus's comment, that one of the takeaways for me in this game is when you've committed yourself to a passive situation, it's probably not going to work out to get frisky with a move like a4. Okay, so I played this, rook a1. This was my intention. And why? Because I felt like I had to keep the rooks on the board or something. Queen b3, and he took. And at the time, I felt like this was already really bad news because of queen c1, queen b2, queen d1, and I'm threatened with like this perpetual check. But the weird thing is I can improve the position, let's say here, and do this ridiculous dance here. There's no perpetual because of this. Now, because we always get a tempo with the queen, no matter where he's going to go, and then I can make another improving move if he wants to play the game of the going back and forth. And one of the improving moves will eventually be rook b4, I assume. So I didn't appreciate that in the game, and therefore I was just very happy with queen takes b3. And likewise in the game, I thought rook b1 and the guy's going to hold a draw. But like we just saw, it's not a good situation for the guy. Something like this, and the knight's going to come around to c6, and well, that's it. Game basically over. So a very surprising thing for me. And it's funny when you have a post-game analysis thing and you spend a lot of time on it and you don't really understand what's going on. It's a very interesting phenomenon. So for example, because I didn't get that then, or didn't get it even after the game, I thought rook a2 was a clear mistake. And the fact of the matter is he's already in big trouble. I just didn't really appreciate it. And in this position, I felt in the post-mortem, that I needed to. I thought it was actually a very instructive thing that I came up with. Wouldn't have been a bad try, but I said to myself, look, obviously this king wants to get here, and this king wants to somehow get over here to not only kick my rook, but to gain some defensive squares on the queen side so his other pieces can move around. Okay, so the move I came up with was bishop g5, and if you understand the rook thing, then maybe it's not really what you want to do. But the point is, like, I want to prevent the king from, coming up over here, and he can't come here, and he has troubles playing bishop d2. Now, one hilarious thing actually is on bishop d2, my first thought was that would just be terrible because of knight h3. But surprisingly, now rook b2, and now he has full counterplay. The bishop's actually a good defender, and my pawn is going to fall. However, bishop g5 is still a good move because I can just sit on him, and there's no easy way for his king to escape. So, for example, on king f2 now, then I can do this, and that's just a much stronger version for me. Okay, but like I said, bishop d8 was fundamentally okay. King f2, bishop d2. I take it back. I mean, it would still been nice to just keep the king over there on the king side. King d1, and here definitely a mistake which shows that I didn't understand what was going on. That's right, C complex. Bishop a4 if knight d2, and then the knight's kind of just stuck. Can't go to b3. One thing I want to say about this game, it's an obvious kind of statement, but to me it clarifies what chess training really is about, or what should be focused on, is that you get a maneuvering game like this. A couple things happen. You will go into time pressure. You're probably going to reach an endgame. And so, especially now with this increment business, you can play on forever. And an effect of this 30-second increment played out immediately in this game. This is the longest game I can remember playing, probably the longest of my life. I think we went something like 140 moves because I just kept pressing and pressing. And that's an effect, obviously, of having 30 seconds to move. You can just keep going. When you watch the Super GMs playing now, they are now accustomed to playing with a 30-second increment. It's pretty impressive that they can just basically sit forever. And what I mean by that is let their clock go down to like 5 seconds. And I think you would have to grow up with digital clocks to even have the sensibility to be able to do something like that. But clearly, like, playing well now involves psychologically being willing to do that and being good at it, cool under pressure, and of course, as we're going to see here, playing technical endings well when you have to play them quickly. And in general now, in contrast to like when I was a kid, when you get more time, the end games are generally all going to be fast. And this is my most important point that I'm driving at, the most mistakes from both you and your opponent are going to come at this phase of the game with less time, and end games are just more complicated, in my experience, than other positions. There's more critical positions in the ending. People are going to blow it more often. So that's why I get I preach to other people, but also to myself, that the end game is the most important thing where things are decided. And it certainly was true here. It was a big wake-up call for me to study this game, just how badly I played certain positions coming up, and in my next move as well. Okay, preaching over. Let's move on. I'll talk about more in other videos. Bishop g5. Superficial because the knight actually wants to come back. And what am I doing? I'm preventing rook b2. Right? So, for example, king c2, rook b2, rook b8. There's now no rook b2 because of this trick. Right? Like this. So it's a superficial way to stop white from doing what he shouldn't be doing anyway, trading the rooks, because it's going to be hard anyway for white to play this position. But with the rooks off, we're going to see it's actually much, much more difficult. Now, here was a chance to maybe just get a slightly worse position with, say, knight e2. And really, yeah. And I think during the game, I didn't understand that I was actually much better here after bishop g5. Anyways, the guy plays knight d1. He's in a little time pressure, of course, too. And now I figured it out. It took me, what are we, we're at several moves from a4. a4 was played on move 35, we're on move 48. So it took me 13 moves to figure out what the general plan needed to be here. Bishop e8, I'm just getting out of the way of the knight. Knight e2. And now the guy offered me a draw, and so it's clear that he didn't understand the dangers of the position. And, obviously I didn't get it either. Okay, so knight e7, I'm going to play on, and now I think it's a really very difficult position for black to play here. There's no, for white to play. There's no easy answers for what to do. But trading rooks, as he does, is definitely going to be a path to suffering. Okay. Well, honestly, I think he really thought it was a draw. I think he really thought, like, he had a whole game plan for sitting on the position, and he felt like I wasn't making progress. And so the guy was just going to sit. And, one actually interesting thing about this old Russian guy that I'm playing here is he comes from a older school where pre-computer and everything, where sitting, trying to make a draw against a stronger opponent isn't, some terrible thing. It's not only not a terrible thing, but it's like an okay way to play chess. And oftentimes, the problem will be that the stronger player, or the person who thinks they're stronger, let's put it that way, will overreach. And I've definitely done that in a lot of very similar positions. Okay, it's clear. Rook b2 is incorrect. And now I should be totally winning. And let's just get a sense of the time here. We are, I'm down to like a little under 10 minutes here. So I felt very confident, and it still astounds me that I did not win this game. All right, bishop e1, knight a5, g3. Now, let's just say g3 is a little bit of a desperation move, but he realizes that he has to do something to get some kind of counterplay now. And a little bit with like the a4 move, only when white felt the pressure of the sitting, because, like I said, sitting isn't an easy thing to do. Only then did he try to do something active. And this active one ends up paying off a little more for him. Now, in the post, I criticized my next move, where I just took the thing. And I felt like I should have played g5. But the more I looked at it later, I wasn't totally convinced. Like, maybe the guy just, after g5, just plays bishop d2, and then carries on his way with f4, which is what he wants to do anyway. So I think this was okay. And let me just say, the overall plan that white is reaching for is pretty straightforward, and that is to trade as many pawns as possible in the hope of getting a drawn ending. All right, so here we go. Knight e2, bishop d1, f4, takes, knight takes. Now, in this position, the computer turns me on to strange moves I could do here, such as the simple, it's not simple at all, knight c6, where we're just going to say that the discovered check is absolutely meaningless. For example, knight h5, king anywhere, and some kind of bishop f6 thing. And the knight's not coming out anymore. Now, about that though, this move, there's a funny thing that happens in the next several moves. I make several, let's call them second best moves, but in time pressure where I need to hold on to my time advantage and I just want to hold, the things that seem reasonable in my position, I don't want to make it complicated. And eventually, that unwillingness to really punish my opponent is what gives him some semblance of chance in this game. So let's see how this slide happens. It's very fascinating to me. King d7. Okay, I'm just getting out of the way. e5. A clever move. And at first I was like, what? What are you doing? But the point is that he's pursuing a policy of saying that I'm going to have to play f6 or f5 at some point to get my pawns rolling, and when that happens, he will have traded off another pawn, right? And the more pawns he gets gets the trade, the closer he is to drawing. Though it's really pretty difficult still. All right, so let me show you his idea. Knight c6 was obviously coming, h4, and I played bishop h6. Bishop h6 is another move where I could be critical of it. I felt in the post-mortem that bishop d8 was stronger, but bishop h6 definitely doesn't throw anything away. And here's his idea. Knight h3, he wants to play knight g5. Okay. Here is another example of a move where I play, let's call it the clarifying move. The move where I'm going to say, I'm just making my life simpler in this mild time scramble. A lot of times people submit a game for me when I do the member analysis at the end of every month, and I don't like going over games if they're just like some 10-minute or 15-minute game online. And so it's a little funny to me to go over this because it's essentially like a 10-minute game with a 30-second increment that I'm playing here. But one reason I really want to focus on it is I feel like all modern endgames are going to look something like this. There's going to be serious time pressure at the end. There's not going to be that much, time to do any kind of deep think. So the move which would have been a little bit more tactical, but definitely a move to just knock my opponent out, would have been bishop e3, trying to put the bishop here now. And it really is outrageously bad for the guy. For example, knight g5, check to the miserable king, bishop h5, and yeah, absolutely terrible. Another way could be like bishop g2, and I think part of it was I didn't want to let's say liberate that bishop. I was so happy with keeping him chained down, and we'll see that that's the motivation for playing knight d4. But let's say here, something like here, king c1, here, and if he takes the thing, this is like the worst double bishop situation ever. And brings me to my simple dogma for the ending, any ending really, which is that you need two weaknesses. And in this case, I think you can say the two bishops are, the lack of the two bishops for black are a weakness. And of course, the dreaded a-pawn. And yes, it's a big deal that I control the queening square. So this one, I think, you just say to yourself, it's got to be winning. All right. So like I said, I'm making things a little bit complicated for myself. Knight d4 takes bishop e2. I'm just clearly trying to make it easy. All right. One thing about this making it easy situation is, it's a funny thing when you think about great American chess players. I think our two greatest players in the modern age really are Fischer and Fabi. And one key difference between Fischer and Fabi is that Fischer always wanted clarity, and Fabi is very comfortable with the madness. And what I'm doing here really is following Fischer-like guidelines with making things simple. And the reason I felt this was winning, and it's definitely winning, but I'm just making it maybe a little harder than it needs to be, is that I have one advantage, which is, of course, the extra outside pass pawn, and also that the knight is very good when it comes to local weaknesses because it can touch both colors and the bishop cannot. So that's why I thought it was winning, which it is. It's just a little bit more complicated than it need to be. Bishop f2, king c6, king c2, knight f4, bishop g3, knight h3, bishop h4. Okay, now I make a mistake here, and again, doesn't throw away the win, but it just makes things harder. And I wanted to bring up Fischer earlier because I feel like this position is a great example of the way Fischer actually did play and play incredibly well, which is just, let's call it the idea of improving your position before you move on. Okay, and let's be clear what I mean when I say move on. A5 is the move on. And can I improve the position? Yeah, I can just fix the knight. And the easy thing for me to do would be put my knight first on f3. And the guy's going to have to do something like this. And then a5. And, in time pressure, you could say to yourself, okay, maybe this is still a little bit complicated, but by all means, the knight is more dangerous on f3 and more flexible. It has ideas of knight d4, has ideas of knight e1, makes it a little harder for the bishop to move as well. And I think that's all I would have needed to see to play this way. But let me show a sample variation I came up with in the post, something like this. And then I'm threatening something like knight b4, and then just king a6, and he's in total zugzwang. Knight b4 is going to come, and it's going to be absolute devastation. Okay, and there's no, bishop a5 check or anything like that. Okay, so like I said, I was making things difficult for myself and played a5. One funny thing about playing what's called simple chess is the game doesn't become more simple, right? It just might get longer, but the madness of chess, you'll never escape it, For example, if you play a London or a Collie, you're not escaping the madness. You will face it. There's no way. You will get some hairy position later that you are going to have to figure it out. Okay, so bishop e1, good move. I take the thing. Knight f3, bishop c3. And now, my friends, we have a very delicate situation, which, to my astonishment, I discovered, like, oh man, this might not be so easy after all. The simple point is, like, the dream of this e5 pawn is realizing itself. And let's just say something very obvious that wasn't immediately clear to me, is that my weakness of c5 can later be a problem, right? Simply put, it's hard for my king to run without this pawn eventually becoming a target. Okay, so I made, I'm down to like 5 minutes here, and I'm nervous as all freak out that I just, want to play quickly, because I know that even if I've blown it a little bit, that I can, at the very least, put up a great struggle ahead for the guy. And yeah, I made 140 moves or whatever it was. I promise I won't show you the whole 140 moves. But the answer here was really hard, and one of the things it's already gotten to the point where it's very difficult to play the right moves, and the answer is knight d4. And let's just say there's a very simple reason why I didn't consider this move, and that's because white now has the connected passer. The problem, though, is in this position, I will be able to, at my leisure, because he's going to have to leave f3, I can play e4. totally winning. But just the idea of letting him take on d4 was not, I wasn't ready for it. And it has to be said that on knight d4, the guy can play king d2, and then it's still not easy. For example, if you play f5, which is really what I'd rather do, then a terrible thing happens where now we can take and just sit, and it's totally drawn. There's nothing I can do. I'm never fast enough to come take that guy, and there's no way I can advance these guys without the c-pawn running. Major bummer. You can see it's already become very difficult. So I would have to play f6, king e3, fe5, king e4, king d6. Does this make me nervous? Yes, it makes me nervous. Not clear that this is what I want. And then the other move, let me just play a couple more moves like this. And I can play knight f6, and am I winning? Hard to say. In my post game, I ended up just calling this a clear advantage for black. I'm not comfortable saying anything more than that. So, if I wanted to be a genius after king d2, this is how hard it would be. I think I have to play king d7 with the idea of just parking the knight and then going around. And this position is actually winning. And it took me a long time to understand that. Let me just play a couple. Well, there's that variation, which is, actually, this is a useful one. Because you're playing a game, you're not necessarily convinced that you're winning this thing until you begin to see the power of the connected passers. But already, this is the needle I would have to thread to win this position here. Obviously, a real pain. Okay, so yeah, really intense. And I spent some time looking at this. Yeah, it's very difficult. Now, one thing about my intuition was correct, that even if I play this ugly retreating move to go back to h7 to then play f6, that I would still have practical chances. And when I say that, I didn't know, obviously, the evaluation of the position. I just knew that it hurt me really badly to have to move my knight back. So, king d2, f5, and I didn't know how to evaluate the position. It's obviously a major bummer, though, that my knight is so funny looking. And only now, too, or soon, what do I realize that, oh, right, the pawn on c5 is a major weakness. Now, one thing that I want to give credit to my opponent here is he could have followed on his path of, trading pawns with d4, and definitely I would have some technical issues trying to win that position. But it's by all means, I think, a winning position because the power of the connectors are so strong. And the c-pawn's a little bit like a tourist. Like, I can catch that guy if he runs. Okay. Bishop e1 is what happened. King d6. And now, very much like the decision with a4 earlier, where white needs to make a conscious decision to not go forward. He plays king f4 instead of the more, let's call it, safe king e4. All right, let me show you what happens. So king f4, knight f8, bishop g3. So white's intention here is saying something like, okay, if you mess around, I'm going to come in and get counterplay. And that is actually, I guess, completely wrong. He should not be dreaming of any kind of counterplay. He needs to sit. And I actually could not come up with any kind of way for me to get play in this position. And one thing I just want to stress is my king here can't leave. It doesn't jump like a knight, but you see what I mean. It can't come over here because of the c pawn. And I can't do knight e5 because then he's fine after this move. Okay, so king f4, though, gave me the chance with knight f8, bishop g3, and then I played knight d7, but my chance was knight g6, king g4, and now this really dirty move, king e7. And the point is, knight e5 is now going to come, and white is not in time to take on c5 because I'm going check and takes. So, for example, king h5, king f7, bishop d6, and now the stunner e5. Very strong move where I am going to play knight f4 and I'm going to take on d3. And right, the game is over because we're going to get that same situation where I'm pushing this guy and this pawn is going to be a spectator, because I can both play king d5 and any kind of knight c6 that I want. And we have this brutally winning position here. Now, as it was, I, of course, blew it. You guys knew this already. And like I said, I feel like this kind of endgame, it's weird, you know, like I've spent a lot of time doing endgame puzzles, not only for trading, but because I enjoy them. And this isn't quite a puzzle, right? This is a very real game situation, but there are aspects of like endgame tactics involved in all of the variations that I did. In the game I played, let's call it a superficial move, and now to my astonishment, I was not able to make any kind of progress. Even though I got this nice f5 move, I am the c5 pawn is killing me. If that pawn were like just anywhere else, I think I'd be winning without too much grief. But now I'm unable really to push the pawn forward. But you can see that I obviously tried 1,000 different ways to massage white, and I just kept going and going. And next week, what I'm going to do is go over my next round. And it's important actually to understand a lot of the failings of my next round. I don't want to make excuses. Came from the fact that this game went 140 moves or whatever it did. And it was simply too long and too exhausting. And part of the training that I have to do, obviously, is just to get physically fit to be able to go this kind of distance. It's not an easy thing. And that ruined me for the next game. At least that's part of the reason I had such grief. And my opponent, he was like, we're both murdered. You know, this went so long, you know, it's basically well past midnight and you got to get up in a couple hours to go do your next game, and you're totally jazzed up as well. This tournament is from that tournament in DC in February, which it was called maybe the Washington Open or something like that. And yeah, that was the last tournament I played. Like I said, I don't know when I'm going to get to play again. Let me give a quick shout out to a couple things. Next week, it's going to be a slightly different schedule. I'm going to be starting at 5. I want to give a shout out to the Dojo here. And we're going to do we're trying to create a lot of content. And the last couple days I was studying this game in particular, which I want to stress is kind of the central part of my chess work, is going over my own games. I'm going to talk about that in a new YouTube video. I hope you guys check out how to analyze your games and hopefully do some other chess content, especially on the YouTube. We won our vote chess battle. And this last time, and maybe we're going to do something more like that. Anyways, we're trying to do more and more. And the ChessDojo has, we got all kinds of things going on. Check out our Discord channel. Maybe I'll flash the dojo one more time. And Yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Thank you for being here. Like I said at the beginning of the show, if I didn't have to report to you on my weekly progress every week, I'm sure I would slack off. And especially at a time like this, it's very easy for me to make reasons not to do the hard work of studying. And in this YouTube video I'm going to do probably tomorrow, I'm going to talk a little bit why it's so hard to analyze your games. All right, till next time. Bye-bye.